It was reported to me that the Israeli ambassador told an audience that included congressmen that the telephone call that took place recently between Mr. Netanyahu and President Trump was extremely tense. And at the end of it, Mr. Netanyahu's hair was allegedly on fire, certainly metaphorically.
Right.
That's possible. I've also heard that he wants to fly to Washington. And then finally, I would say that, what have we seen in the past whenever President Trump expressed reservations or the potential for any sort of agreement, President Netanyahu has shown up. And ultimately, the agreement did not happen. So I would not exclude that as a possibility at this stage. The other thing is, let's assume that what you repeated is accurate and President Trump agrees to it. There's nothing in there that suggests that Mr. Netanyahu is in agreement. He could restart the war from his standpoint and then demand that we join him. And frankly, I think there's enough influence and power on the Hill to ensure that that happens.
The agreement, if rejected by Netanyahu, and it almost surely would be in this form, because of immediate and comprehensive ceasefire on all fronts, would have to mean Lebanon and Gaza. One would expect Netanyahu would do his best to trash it. Here's President Trump yesterday on a tarmac. I think he's in Florida. I'm not sure. There's a profound insult and then high praise of Prime Minister Netanyahu in the same breath. Watch this. Number 6, Chris.
What have you said to Prime Minister Netanyahu about Iran and how long to hold off on strikes?
He's fine. He'll do whatever I want him to do. He's very, very good man. He'll do whatever I want him to do, and he's a great guy. To me, he's a great guy. Don't forget, he was a wartime prime minister, and he's not treated right in Israel, in my opinion.
Colonel, he'll do whatever I want him to do. Now, some of your colleagues on this show have suggested the wrong person was saying that. That Netanyahu could very well have been saying of Trump, he'll do whatever I want him to do. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think you're raising the critical question of our time right now. And the critical question is, who governs the United States? And I think that's a question that should be explored, and we should try to find an answer. Now, we've had special interests in this country exert disproportionate influence and power in the past.
They just did in the 4th Congressional District of Kentucky.
Well, I think that's an example, although there are now people telling me they're uncomfortable with the numbers that were reported because they're not sure that there are that many eligible voters in the district. I have no idea. I really don't. But having said that, I think Mr. Massey did what he had to do. He conceded, and he recognized that while this is in a short-term sense clearly a victory for his opponents, this is by no means the end of the dispute, and certainly not the end of Mr. Massey. But I think we should try to answer this question, and we should start it immediately. Who is governing this country? As I said, we've had this before. When the railroads were being built across the United States after the Civil War, it was obvious who was running everything. And these were the equivalent of today's billionaires that were building the railroads and linking the various industrial centers. And these are people like Rockefeller and Vanderbilt and Carnegie and so forth. And they used to meet practically every year in Cleveland, which at that point in time was a boom town. And they would discuss who was going to be the next president. They were not there to discuss who would be candidate, because after the Civil War, the assumption was we're just going to have Republican government now as long as we want it because the Democrats started the Civil War. Well, it didn't quite work out that way, but with one or two exceptions, they pretty much got what they wanted before World War I. And the man, of course, broke that mold was Teddy Roosevelt, because he was somebody nobody wanted as president, and he was kind of a compromise candidate for vice president. But I think we need to ask that question, who's really calling the shots? Because the level of corruption now in Washington is certainly as great, if not greater, than it's ever been in our history.
The foreign ministry spokesperson for Pakistan basically says none of the specifications that have been raised in recent days regarding the various aspects of the talks can be confirmed.
Well, that's pretty important. You would think the Pakistanis would be the first to know, Judge.
Correct. So I hope we didn't jump the gun or jump the shark or whatever the phrase is and give people a false hope. But there is still that report that you got, a verbal report of the tense conversation between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And then we have this nonsense from President Trump himself, which was probably intended to either to tamp that down or to remind everybody that in his view, in that relationship, he's the dominant person. I don't think that's so, but that's obviously what he thinks.
I don't think so either. And I think that, again, we journey back down this horrible road to the Epstein files. We don't really know what's in those things, but we could speculate, and it's probably no good news, and it probably involves far, far too many people in Washington. And I think the people that are in the files are all hostage to the Mossad and Israeli influence and control.
Right.
That's been made pretty clear. I think John Kiriakou has made that clear. So right now, I hope it's true. I sincerely do, because it's in the interest of the United States and the interest of the world. You know, people don't understand how much damage already has been done. It's going to take 2, 3, 4, even 5 years in many cases to recover from the damage in the Gulf. And we normally talk about the 4 F's, you know, the feedstock, food, fertilizer, and fuel. But there's more than that. You start ranging into other areas beyond the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and then helium and aluminum and so forth. If we go in again, the Iranians have made it very clear they will strike decisively against the West Coast, and that is primarily UAE and the rest. They will wipe out whatever is there in the oil infrastructure and probably the desalination plants. And that will effectively empty the area of population.
Let's switch gears slightly. In your view, is Iran stronger militarily today than it was on February 28th when Netanyahu and Trump began their bombing?
Well, I think it is stronger militarily, yes. You know, I know this is disappointing to many people, and a lot of people have wanted desperately to believe whatever President Trump said, but since the CIA decided to leak the truth to the New York Times, and we discovered that 90% of the capability was still intact, that contrary to popular belief, regardless of whatever thousands of targets were struck, the real capability that threatened the region and threatens us and threatens Israel at this point is largely undamaged. I think that's probably true. Now, there is a lot of information out there. Some of it's open source, some of it is not. That's suggesting that both the Russians and the Chinese have resupplied and replenished many stocks of missiles and equipment, and have added some new equipment, some new radars with much greater range that can be integrated into a much more effective air and missile defense system now. And also some new cruise missiles from the Chinese. I'm sure others have talked about this, that have a range of at least 300 kilometers, which means they can reach out 180 to 200 miles offshore. And they are absolutely designed to fly at nearly hypersonic speed or above, and ultimately sink capital ships. So I think they are stronger at this point. They're better equipped. And each time, you've got to give it to the Iranians on this point. Their engineering skills are excellent. The Israelis have always said that, and they're right. But more important, after each involvement in war with with Israel and us, first the 12-day episode, then the 3+ week episode, they have learned very, very carefully what they needed to do in the future. And they have shown up better prepared, more lethal, more capable than they were previously. Now, the good news is, I guess if we have to go back into this, is that the United States Armed Forces, largely air and naval forces, have more ammunition, more capability now than they did to begin with. And it's not enough for, say, a 3, 4, 5-day intensive bombardment. It goes beyond that. In other words, we've moved up additional loads of missiles and ammunition. Now, what does that mean to what remains in the stocks at home? I have no idea. But what I'm trying to say is that everything but the kitchen sink is floating around or waiting to be loaded onto aircraft ashore and will be hurled at Iran if we go back at this. So the damage on all sides, I expect, will be much worse this time than it was the last time.
But do the Americans understand, does the Pentagon understand that decapitation strikes and air alone will not produce a successful achievement of their military objectives? We've been through this for weeks now.
I suspect they do, but remember, we went through this for 70 days against the Serbs in Kosovo, and we spread the campaign to Serbia proper, destroying whatever we could that we could characterize as of some military potential, like the Yugo factory and so forth. It didn't work, but at the same time, during the last 2 weeks, Strobe Talbot was sent to Moscow, and he held secret talks with Yeltsin and his group, and they agreed at the time, the Russians, that they would pull the plug on the Serbs. In other words, they would announce to the Serbs that they could no longer promise them food, sustenance, and fuel and medical support through the coming Balkan winter. This was towards the end of May, beginning of June 1999. And when that became clear to Milosevic, he decided to pull out. At the time, however, the air community insisted this was all because of what they'd done. It really wasn't. So what I'm trying to tell you is that there are some people who have recognized that, and they will say that, but I don't think you're going to get that from the majority of airmen. I think their belief is that this time around, the target set will be the right target set. And this time around, we'll have more intensity and more bombing. And this time around, we will be successful. The Iranians will capitulate. I don't think so, but I think there's many saying that.
Trump still has not found an off-ramp. He's still frantically looking for one. And his last resort will be brute force.
Yes. Well, I think that's inevitably the case. You escalate until you can't anymore. That it does genius to figure that out. And then you want to do one of two things. You give up and go home, or you take a break and try to do it again. I don't think we'll get a chance to do it again. So whatever happens this time around will be the last phase. Now, a friend of mine who is more imaginative than I am said, Doug, Trump is checked into the Hotel California. You can check in, but you can't check out. And he's stuck. I think that's true. And I'm not sure that he's going to get what he wants from the Iranians, because what he's really looking for is something he can point to that demonstrates he's winning. I don't think that's going to happen. And you know as well as I do, given the sort of Roy Cohn mentality that he's adopted, if he can't twist it into a win, he's not going to be happy with it. And unfortunately, we're hostage to Donald Trump and his demands.
Here's the latest out of Trump's mouth 2 hours ago. Watch the pregnant lady next to him. Chris number 19.
We have total control of the Strait of Hormuz, as you know, with our blockade. The blockade's been 100% effective. Nobody's been able to get through. It's like a steel wall. It's our Navy. We have the greatest military anywhere in the world. We wiped out their Navy. We not wiped out their air. I think they're down to about, I would say we knocked out 85% of their missile capacity. It's very hard for them now to build missiles, to build drones. We have great drone technology, anti-drone technology now that, frankly, we didn't have even 2 months ago. We have unbelievable drone technology, both for making them and also for knocking them down. But look, we're going to either make sure they don't have a nuclear weapon, or we're going to have to do something very drastic. And the people of the country, I believe when it's put to the people of our country, they will all agree that we cannot let Iran have a.
That was a corpulent guy, not a pregnant lady. Sorry.
I just received this note that said, tell the judge it is someone with a large abdominal cavity.
Yes.
So I
But
guess
to the-
that's an
but to
honest
the-
mistake.
Right. But to the president, he's mouthing nonsense.
Well, of course he is. We know that yesterday, I think it was something like 26 ships passed through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes.
They paid the toll.
Yes.
The Iranians escorted them. What's he talking about? I mean, I guess they failed to get him up to date. And this blockade, he called it off. He suspended it, remember?
Yeah. Here's Chris, can you full screen up again? Here's what the reporter asked him that provoked that response. CNN report, Iran rebuilding military industrial base faster than expected, already producing drones, according to U.S. intel. You referenced this earlier. It's a CIA leak.
Yes. I don't know if people are failing to keep him up to date, or he simply chooses to believe as he wishes and dismisses reports that don't align with his expectation. I mean, both are possible. I don't know the answer, but at this point, if he keeps telling people over and over and over again, we destroyed their Air Force, and they had practically none, and we destroyed their Navy, which amounted to 7 frigates and a few small boats, I think they're probably going to start throwing things at him. He'll get the hook, and the gong will ring, and they'll pull him off stage.
Did Trump get any palpable help from President Xi last week in his wish to have the Chinese pressure the Iran government?
Oh, yes. I think he got some enormous help and assistance. President Xi welcomed him to China as the leader of a declining power, and Xi stood there and welcomed him as a rising power. And that was made abundantly clear. And evidence that Trump got some help, I think, is clearly visible when Donald Trump talks about the realities of trying to defend Taiwan. He must have had a very useful discussion with President Xi and reached the conclusion that you'd be completely insane to go to war with China in an attempt to protect Taiwan. So, right now I'm celebrating the fact that President Trump has said, look, Taiwan's 100 miles from China. We're 6,000 or 7,000 miles away. This is impossible to support. Well, hallelujah. Congratulations, President Trump. You're right. God bless you for saying that. Now, can we please line everybody up who keeps talking about war with China and shut them up? So, no, I think from that standpoint, the visit is a huge success. Now, as far as the squad or company or platoon of billionaires that went over there, I didn't see very many happy faces on the way out.
No. If you watched Elon Musk, he was a sightseer the whole time he was there. Here's somebody who was not happy with any peace negotiations in Iran or any recognition of the realism of the status of Taiwan. Sorry to ruin your afternoon, Colonel. Cut number 13.
So you're calling for strikes on the energy infrastructure, Senator?
I'm calling to hurt this regime. If you do the same old thing, you're going to get the same results. Hurt them more. Maybe they'll make a deal if you hurt them enough. But right now, I think they're trying to wait us out. I think they're playing games. And in the words of the president, I think they're crazy.
Finally stop listening to him?
No, unfortunately not. I think so. There's something else that's very important that never comes up for discussion, and I just want to touch on this point for everybody. Whenever you build military power, this doesn't matter if you're a small nation, a large nation, a medium-sized nation. Whenever you build military power, I'm talking about everything short of a nuclear weapon. And no matter how much money you spend, your force can only do so much. In other words, you can't build something that can go everywhere, anytime, and suddenly defeat everyone. In other words, if you tried to send the United States Armed Forces to dislodge an enemy in control of the Antarctica, well, I think you'd have a hell of a time. We're not built to do that. And I don't think people understand that this sort of World War II style force structure with updated weaponry and some new technology really is not the right force to deal with what's going on in the Persian Gulf. It never was. Now, the British, as we discussed before, made this terrible mistake in 1915. They ended up putting over 500,000 troops into the Dardanelles, the Strait. They failed miserably in the face of 350,000 Turks. The Turks drove them away. They finally gave up and said, this is stupid, and withdrew. Now, that did not mean the end of the British Empire. It was embarrassing. It was disappointing, but they brought the wrong force for the wrong mission in the wrong place. That's what we've done. Doesn't mean that our military power is weak or incapable or we don't have good people manning it. But we need to come to terms with this reality. Most important, President Trump does. And the appropriate thing for him to say at some point, and I know he'll never do it, is that I asked the armed forces to do something that really they couldn't do. And he shouldn't have done that. But then again, I don't know what he was told, and maybe he never asked, Judge.
If the head of a country is aware that a foreign intelligence agency has blown up one of its passenger jets, and then some people affiliated with that agency are flying planes over the Capitol, and they ask them to turn the planes down to around, they didn't have permission to enter the country's airspace, and the head defense minister ordered the planes shot down. Is that a crime, or is that protected under rules of engagement and protection of the homeland? Speaking of Raul Castro, of course.
Yeah, I really don't know. And it's disturbing that we're seeing these kinds of things come out the way we did on the alleged giant drug production and sales agency in Venezuela, when we knew that Venezuela was, a midget compared with Colombia and Ecuador and other places. I don't know, Judge. It strikes me that we're building a case, just as we built the case to take out Saddam Hussein. Nobody bothered to talk about the fact that until 1989, we had bankrolled, supported, equipped, and advised Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi military in its war with
Iran.
So,
right.
Suddenly we changed horses. Nobody paid attention. An awful lot depends on something in whatever we do right now. Most Americans, most of the time, are not engaged. This is something that President Trump has never understood. His ego is at stake in his mind. But the truth is that if he declared an end to the war tomorrow morning, most Americans would say, well, that's great. Next. Most are just not interested. They're not engaged. I just went down through the Carolinas on a trip, and it was perfectly obvious that the vast majority of people weren't even aware that there was anything remotely like a war going on. So I think the problem now is the same with Cuba or wherever we go. If you don't sustain heavy casualties, and I mean 500 people in a day, 1,000 people in 2 days, something like that, they're not going to pay any attention. If you keep it down to a very dull roar, you can get away with a lot for a long time. Look how long it dragged on in Vietnam. It dragged on for years, and the truth is nobody knew what they were doing. That was what came up over and over and over again. That's what Lyndon Johnson was told. That's what the generals came back and said. Nobody knows what we're doing. So I think bottom line is right now, the smartest thing he could do is to pull out of this thing. Now, when it comes to Cuba, I know there are people out there saying, oh, this is a wonderful opportunity. They have beautiful beaches, beautiful water. We just need to go in there, take off the gloves, develop this new capitalist paradise, this market-oriented economy, and we'll have casinos all over the beaches and swanky hotels and everything else. Well, we know what was there before Castro took over. And however much you may hate or detest Castro, he did everything in his power to crush the gambling, the prostitution, the drugs, and all the other illicit activities. My great fear is if this all falls apart, and I'm sure that Cuba really is in bad shape, and we go in there with all guns blazing, and by that I mean we have the president and his friends get off the plane and billionaires troop across the airfield, and we know what they're there to do, and it's not necessarily in the interest of the United States.